Mike was just a regular mechanic, scraping by in a small-town garage, until one quiet act of kindness turned his whole world upside down. Fired for fixing an old man's scooter for free, he thought his life had fallen apart. But the next day, a line of luxury cars appeared outside his home, and what followed was something no one could have predicted. Who was this elderly man really? And why did some of the wealthiest people in town suddenly want to meet Mike? This is the unbelievable story of how doing the right thing, just once, can change everything. The sun was already high, casting unforgiving heat over the cracked asphalt of Wilson's auto shop. Mike Reeves wiped a smear of grease from his cheek with a rag already soaked through with sweat. It was barely noon, and he'd already handled 3 oil changes, a transmission flush, and now he was tightening the final lug nut on Mrs. Peterson's Buick. His stomach grumbled, but lunch wasn't happening anytime soon. "Mike, customer up front!" Darren's voice rang out from the lobby. The kid had only worked at the front desk for 2 weeks, and Mike was pretty sure he still thought blinker fluid was a real thing. Mike sighed and stood, stretching his back. 7 years in this garage, and it felt like he'd fixed every rusted-out clunker in town. Twice. The place was run down, the pay was lousy, and Frank Wilson, the owner, had the personality of a debt collector with a hangover. Still, work was work, and Riverdale wasn't exactly overflowing with opportunity. When he entered the front, he spotted a frail-looking elderly man in a worn plaid shirt speaking to Darren. Next to him sat a red mobility scooter, faded and clearly in need of attention. "I just need the motor checked," the man was saying. "It makes a grinding noise, then quits after a few feet." Darren blinked, confused. We don't really do medical equipment here, sir." Mike stepped forward. "I can take a look." The old man's eyes lit up. "Would you? That'd be a huge help. Name's Walter Jenkins. Had this scooter for 8 years. Never gave me any grief until yesterday." Mike knelt down to inspect the scooter. He'd always had a soft spot for seniors, probably because his grandpa had raised him after his parents split. The motor was simple, and the issue was immediately clear. The drive belt was shredded, and one of the pulleys had a hairline crack. "Drive belt's shot," Mike said. "Pulley's cracked too. But it's an easy fix." Walter's shoulders sagged with relief. "What'll it cost? I'm on a fixed income these days." Before Mike could answer, the front door slammed open. Frank Wilson waddled in, eyes narrowing when he saw the scooter. "What the hell is this? We don't work on these things." Mike stood his ground. "Just a drive belt and pulley, Frank. Same basic system as a serpentine belt. 30-minute job." Frank sniffed, already calculating how to squeeze every penny from the situation. He turned to Walter with a rehearsed smile. "This kind of job requires special parts. Labor rates apply. That'll be $347.50. Walter's face fell. $300? Mike stepped in. "Frank, come on. The parts cost $25. That's robbery." Frank's face darkened. "I set prices here. You don't like it? You're free to leave." Walter's hands trembled as he reached for his wallet. I don't get my check until next week." Frank didn't blink. "That's the price. Take it or leave it." Mike's jaw clenched. He couldn't watch this man get gouged. "Mr. Jenkins," he said gently, "why don't you leave it with us overnight? I'll see if I can find a better solution." Frank shot him a venomous glare, but held his tongue in front of the customer. Walter nodded gratefully, slowly making his way out, cane tapping against the floor. The second the door closed, Frank erupted. "What the hell do you think you're doing? You don't make deals in my shop. He's an old man who just wants to get around. You were going to scam him." "It's business," Frank spat. "He'll pay what the market demands." Mike stared at him, disgusted. "That's not business. That's exploitation. Undercut me again and you're gone." Mike said nothing, but he had already made up his mind. That evening, once the shop was empty and the sun was starting to dip below the horizon, Mike rolled Walter's scooter into the back. He worked under the harsh fluorescent lights, rummaging through the spare parts bins until he found what he needed. The drive belt? A perfect match from an old riding mower. The pulley? Salvaged from a disassembled electric cart. He had it fixed within 40 minutes. The scooter purred to life, smooth and steady. Mike loaded it into his truck and called Walter. "Mr. Jenkins, it's Mike from Wilson's Auto. Your scooter's fixed. I can bring it by." Walter's house was in a quiet neighborhood, the kind with sagging chain-link fences and porches filled with old furniture and memories. He blinked in surprise when Mike pulled up. "You fixed it already?" he said as Mike unloaded the scooter. "Turned out simpler than I thought." Walter examined it, watching the motor hum with new life. "What's the damage?" "No charge," Walter frowned. "Now, son, I may be old, but I'm not stupid." Mike chuckled. "Seriously, my grandpa always said help when you can. Just consider it my good deed for the week." Walter's face softened. "Don't see much of that anymore." He reached for his wallet, but Mike shook his head. "Just enjoy your freedom. That's enough." Driving home, Mike felt lighter than he had in months. He knew Frank would lose it if he ever found out, but it didn't matter. Doing the right thing wasn't always easy. But tonight, it felt right. The next morning at 6:30, Mike's alarm buzzed him awake. He groaned and shuffled toward the kitchen for coffee. But when he looked out the window, his stomach dropped. Frank was standing in his driveway, red-faced, fists clenched. Mike didn't need to ask why. He already knew. Mike stepped outside, trying to look calm, though his heart pounded like a jackhammer. Frank's car idled at the curb, and the man himself stood there like a storm cloud with a business license. "Morning, Frank," Mike said, rubbing the back of his neck. "Don't morning Frank me, you backstabbing son of a bitch," Frank snapped, storming up the driveway. He shoved his phone inches from Mike's face. Mike squinted at the screen. A Facebook post. Walter Jenkins had uploaded a picture of his shiny red scooter and wrote, "Huge thanks to Mike at Wilson's Auto for fixing my scooter when the owner wanted to charge me a fortune. Some people still have a heart. Look, Frank, you went behind my back. You fixed that damn scooter for free. After I quoted a price, using my shop, my tools. You made me look like a crook." Mike took a breath. "I did it after hours. I used spare parts." Frank's face darkened like a thunderhead. "You're fired. Don't even bother coming for your tools. I'll box them up myself." With that, Frank stomped back to his car, peeled out, and left twin streaks of burning rubber on the road. Mike just stood there, fired, after 7 years of loyalty, for doing what any decent person would have done. The silence afterward was deafening. His neighbors peeked through curtains, but no one said a word. The town was small, and word would spread like wildfire. Some would cheer him for standing up. Others would see him as a troublemaker. Back inside, Mike sat on the edge of his couch, staring at the floor. He tried checking job boards on his phone, but each posting felt like a brick wall. Most required certifications he didn't have. Others were in cities too far to afford moving to. He clicked out of the screen and leaned back. How long would his savings last? 2 months, maybe? His landlord wouldn't be impressed by moral victories when rent came due. Around noon, his phone rang. Mike answered without even checking the caller ID. "Mike, it's Walter Jenkins." Mike sat up straighter. "Hey, Mr. Jenkins, everything okay with the scooter?" "Oh, it runs like a dream," Walter said, then paused. "Listen, your boss, Frank, he called me this morning. He was real upset about that post I made, said you'd been fired." Mike hesitated. "I took the post down right away," Walter said quickly. "Didn't mean to cause you trouble. I just wanted people to know you helped me when no one else would." "It's okay. Frank and I were headed for a blow-up sooner or later." Walter was silent for a moment. Then, "I feel awful. Say, you doing anything this afternoon?" Mike glanced around at the empty living room and the unpaid utility bills on the table. "No, not really." "Mind swinging by my place? There's something I'd like to talk to you about," Mike agreed, curious but cautious. He threw on a clean shirt, brushed the worst of the engine grease from his jeans, and drove across town. As he approached Walter's street, his jaw dropped. The road was lined with high-end cars. Not pickups or rusted sedans like usual, but Bentleys, Ferraris, a Rolls-Royce with a chauffeur leaning against the hood. All lined up, shining in the sun like showroom models. Mike double-checked the address. Same modest house, same sagging fence. What in the world was going on? Walter waved from the porch. Come on in, son. Everyone's waiting to meet you. Everyone? Mike stepped into the living room and froze. The room, though modest in size, was filled with sharply dressed men and women, all holding wine glasses and chatting. Their conversations stopped the moment Mike entered. All eyes turned to him. There he is, Walter announced proudly. The young man I told you about. A tall, silver-haired man stepped forward and extended a hand. James Harrington, pleased to meet you. Mike shook it, puzzled. Sorry, I think I'm missing something here. Walter chuckled. Mike, remember when I told you I was on a fixed income? That's true, but that income comes from some very old stock options. James and I co-founded Harrington Medical Systems back in the 70s. Mike blinked. Wait, you founded Harrington Medical? Walter nodded. Retired years ago, but we still meet every month to stay in touch. When I told them about you, they insisted on meeting the man who fixed my scooter without expecting anything in return. James smiled. Walter was always the engineering brain behind our devices. When he told us how quickly you diagnosed the scooter and how you stood up for your principles, well, it got our attention. A woman in a business suit stepped forward. I'm Catherine Reeves, HR Director. We've been looking for someone to head up our equipment maintenance division. Someone who knows machines, but also understands the people who depend on them. She handed Mike a card. We'd like to offer you an interview, but unofficially, this is already a job offer. Mike stared at the card, speechless. It comes with an $85,000 starting salary, full benefits, and relocation assistance, she added. I'm just a car mechanic, Mike stammered. And we're looking for someone exactly like you, Walter said. You've got the skill, but more importantly, you've got heart. Mike looked around the room at the powerful, successful people now smiling at him like an equal. 24 hours ago, he was fired for doing the right thing. Now, he was being offered a career. He swallowed the lump in his throat and looked at Walter. I don't know what to say. Walter patted his shoulder. Say yes. The rest of the afternoon unfolded like something out of a dream. Mike found himself seated in Walter's living room with CEOs, engineers, and board members, sipping coffee out of a ceramic mug that said, "Number 1 Grandpa." These were the kind of people he'd only ever seen on company brochures or on the local news. Movers and shakers, the type who made decisions that changed lives. And now they were asking him about motors, repair workflows, and even his ideas on how to make equipment more accessible for people on fixed incomes. At some point, someone brought out a laptop. They pulled up diagrams of Harrington Medical's current line of mobility aids, wheelchairs, stair lifts, scooters more advanced than anything Mike had ever touched. And yet, when James Harrington asked for Mike's opinion on a design flaw in one of their older units, he didn't hesitate. He leaned forward and said, "Honestly, this bracket design's too fragile. One good bump and it'll misalign the motor mount. If you beefed up the connection point and added a flex joint, it'd last 3 times longer." A silence followed. Mike wondered if he'd gone too far. Then James chuckled. Exactly what we needed to hear. Catherine scribbled a note. You know, we've had 6 different consultants dance around that issue for months. None of them put it that plainly. By the time he left Walter's house, the sun was dipping low and the street, once a row of gleaming machines, was quiet again. Mike climbed into his dented pickup with a stack of business cards in his shirt pocket, a job interview scheduled for Monday, and a sense that something massive had just shifted in his life. He didn't sleep much that night. When Monday rolled around, Mike stood outside the glass doors of Harrington Medical Systems corporate headquarters, feeling wildly underdressed despite his cleanest button-down shirt and khakis. The building was sleek and modern, towering over him with polished steel and glass that reflected a world he'd never belonged to. Until now. The interview wasn't really an interview. It was more of a welcome tour. They showed him the engineering labs, the diagnostics department, even the employee cafe. By the time he sat down in Catherine's office, she slid a contract across the table. All that's missing is your signature. Mike hesitated. Are you sure I'm the guy for this? I mean, I don't have a degree. I've never worked in a lab. You've got real-world experience, Catherine replied, and the rare ability to see both the machine and the person using it. We can teach specs. We can't teach heart, Mike signed. The first few weeks were a whirlwind. Training, onboarding, team meetings, more acronyms than he could keep straight. But he threw himself into it with the same grit he'd once used to replace transmissions on 20-year-old pickup trucks. Within a month, he wasn't just learning. He was improving systems. He noticed that repairs were taking longer than necessary because the field techs didn't have consistent diagnostic tools. So he created a checklist protocol with the engineering department. When he found that elderly clients often felt intimidated by corporate support calls, he proposed a live video help desk staffed by real people, some of whom were retired medical techs who volunteered part-time. Each suggestion earned nods, some even earned applause, and none of it felt like work. For the first time, Mike felt like he was building something bigger than himself. 3 months in, he was promoted to Director of Equipment Support Services. His salary jumped again. He moved out of his tiny apartment and into a 2-bedroom condo close to the office, complete with a balcony and a view of the river. Still modest, still him, but better. He bought a new truck, donated the old one to a local trade school. And every Friday, without fail, he stopped by Walter's house to check in. They'd sit on the porch, watching birds, sipping coffee, and swapping stories. Walter, it turned out, had a sharp wit and a wealth of tales from the early startup days of Harrington Medical. Mike learned more about business in those quiet hours than any MBA could ever teach. One Friday afternoon, Walter rolled up the driveway on his freshly tuned scooter and smiled. "How's the Empire coming along, boss?" Mike laughed. "We're launching that repair assistance program next week. Sliding scale pricing, mobile repairs, and a monthly free clinic at the senior center. It's happening." Walter's eyes twinkled. "You're turning it into something real." "Trying to," Mike said. "And guess what? We're partnering with local garages to handle minor repairs. Ones we train personally." Walter raised an eyebrow. "Including Wilson's Auto?" Mike chuckled. Frank didn't exactly leap at the chance. In truth, Frank Wilson's shop had seen better days. Word had gotten around about his pricing tactics, especially after Walter's Facebook post. And now that Harrington Medical was offering fair, discounted maintenance through trusted partners, many of Frank's regulars had jumped ship. Somewhere deep down, Mike hoped Frank was learning something. About respect, about honesty, about second chances. But he also didn't lose sleep over it. The past was behind him. The road ahead was wide open. That night, as Mike locked up his office, he paused for a moment in the hallway. The building was quiet, the hum of servers the only sound. He walked past a row of framed photos, each showing milestones in the company's history. There, near the end, was a new photo. A group shot from the pilot repair clinic he'd launched last month. Him, his team, a row of smiling seniors, and Walter in the middle, holding up a sign that said, "Kindness has torque." Mike couldn't help but grin. He'd fixed a scooter, sure, but what that scooter really needed was someone to care. And that, it turned out, changed everything. By late spring, Mike's new reality had become something close to routine. But it was a routine he embraced. Mornings started with team briefings, afternoons rolled into site visits or pilot launches, and evenings often ended with policy drafts or design notes. And every day, he felt the same quiet fire. This mattered. The sliding scale program launched with far more momentum than expected. Senior citizens who had long gone without mobility support showed up in droves. Volunteers helped them check in. Technicians walked them through the process step by step, and no one left without a working chair, scooter, or walker. Some paid $10, some paid nothing. Every single one walked, or rolled, away with dignity intact. But the program wasn't just a feel-good project. It worked. Customer satisfaction rates jumped. Local news stations began to feature the clinics. Harrington Medical's public image soared. Even the board of directors took notice. One evening, after wrapping up a community meeting at the senior center, Mike stepped outside into the golden light of dusk. He was packing up his toolkit when he noticed a familiar car in the lot. A gray Ford Crown Victoria. Dented bumper. Crooked antenna. Frank Wilson. Mike's stomach tightened slightly. He hadn't seen Frank in person since the driveway showdown. Rumors said business at Wilson's Auto had taken a serious hit. And a few months ago, Frank's brother-in-law had quietly taken over part of the operation. Frank stood beside the car, arms folded, not looking particularly aggressive, but not exactly friendly either. Mike nodded once. "Hey." Frank shifted. "Hey." An awkward pause settled between them like dust on an old hood. "I've been hearing about your program," Frank finally said. "The one for seniors." Mike kept his tone neutral. "I really thought I was just running a business. But after you left and folks started talking, I saw it. What I'd become." Mike studied him. He didn't see the same bluster anymore. No shouting, no finger jabbing. Just a tired man in a parking lot, maybe trying to patch up something broken. "So what now?" Mike asked. Frank hesitated, then reached into his pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. "I've been talking to your HR director, Catherine. She said you're expanding the Garage Partner program." Mike raised an eyebrow. "We are." "She said there's a training session next month for garages that want to meet your standards." I signed up. Mike took the paper slowly. It was a registration form. Legitimate. Signed. "I don't expect a handout," Frank said. "Just a shot. Maybe a little redemption." Mike stared at the form for a long moment. Then he folded it and slid it into his jacket. "Show up. Listen. Do the work. That's all I ask." Frank nodded, relief flickering in his eyes. "I will." As the old man climbed back into his car and drove away, Mike felt something shift, like a door had opened just a crack. Not forgiveness, not yet. But possibility. Back at the office, Mike gathered his notes and made his way to the elevator. When the doors slid open, Walter was inside, scooter humming as usual. "Evening, boss," Walter said with a grin. Mike stepped in beside him. "Evening." Walter gave him a side glance. "You look like a man who just saw a ghost." Something like that. They rode in silence for a few floors. Then Walter asked, "You ever regret it?" Mike blinked. "What?" "Helping me that day. Losing your job. Walking away from what you knew." Mike shook his head. "Not for a second." Walter smiled, satisfied. "Good answer." They reached the ground floor. The doors opened. The lights of the city poured in. Mike turned to Walter. "Hey, you ever think about upgrading that scooter?" Walter's grin widened. "Never. This one works just fine. Besides, my wife gave it to me. Last gift she ever bought me." Mike nodded. "Then we'll keep it running forever." As they rolled out together into the cool evening, Mike felt something deeper than success. Purpose. Legacy. The understanding that small things, like fixing a scooter or forgiving a rival, could carry weight beyond imagining, because in the end, it wasn't about machines. It was about people. And Mike Reeves had finally found where he was meant to be. 3 months after that parking lot conversation, Frank Wilson stood beside Mike at the grand opening of the new Riverdale Mobility Center, a sleek, bright facility funded by Harrington Medical and supported by Mike's community repair initiative. Frank wore a crisp collared shirt and a volunteer badge, his once gruff demeanor softened by months of effort and humility. He wasn't the same man who shouted in a driveway. Not anymore. The ribbon-cutting ceremony drew quite a crowd. Local families, seniors from across the county, even the mayor, who clapped Mike on the back and called him a hometown hero. Cameras flashed as Walter Jenkins rolled forward in his scooter, the very one that started it all, to do the honors. As the ribbon fluttered to the ground and applause echoed, Mike scanned the crowd. Somewhere in the back stood Darren, the kid from Wilson's Auto, now wearing a work vest and holding a clipboard, managing intake for clients. Mike had offered him a position in logistics, and the kid had risen to the challenge. The entire day felt surreal, like watching a dream unfold in real time. Later, while touring the center's clean, tech-filled repair bay, Walter caught up with Mike. "You built something special here, son," Walter said, voice tinged with pride. Mike smiled. "Couldn't have done it without you." Walter chuckled. "All I did was break down." "No," Mike said, turning serious. "You reminded me why it all matters." Walter looked away for a moment, eyes glossy. "I used to believe the world changed through billion-dollar decisions. Corporate boards, IPOs, but now, I think the real power's in moments. One small decision. One person choosing right over easy." Mike nodded. "Funny how those moments sneak up on you." The weeks that followed proved that sentiment right. Requests for partnership flooded in. Churches, VFW halls, even school districts wanted to replicate the repair program for different needs. Mike spent late nights sketching frameworks, expanding training programs, and creating scalable models other communities could use. But amid the growth and progress, Mike made sure not to lose sight of what mattered most: people. He still visited clients during service calls. He shook hands, listened to stories, remembered names. He insisted that his staff do the same. Technical work could be taught. Empathy couldn't. One rainy afternoon, he was finishing paperwork when a call came through from the front desk. "There's a woman here asking for you," said the receptionist. "Says she doesn't have an appointment but needs help." Mike stood immediately. "I'm on my way." He found her sitting nervously in the lobby, holding the handle of a walker with duct-taped grips. She looked tired, worn down by more than just years. Her name was Janice, and she'd recently taken in her disabled brother after his caretaker passed. His wheelchair had been malfunctioning for weeks, but she couldn't afford the repairs. Mike knelt beside her. "We'll take care of it. Free of charge," her eyes filled with tears. "Why?" Mike smiled. "Because that's what this place is for." Moments later, his team had the chair up on a diagnostic stand, tools in hand, motors humming under inspection. Janice watched, stunned. One act of kindness echoing again. That night, Mike walked the quiet corridors of the now-closed facility, checking lights, locking doors. He paused by a framed photo near the entrance. Walter sitting on his porch, smiling, next to the words, "Kindness has torque." The photo had become a symbol, a reminder to every staff member and visitor that compassion could drive change more powerfully than any engine. Mike's phone buzzed. It was a message from Catherine. "The board wants to meet about expanding to 3 more counties. You free Friday?" He typed back, "Let's do it." As he slipped his phone away, he thought about how far he'd come, from a grease-stained mechanic in a crumbling garage to a man leading something real, something lasting. Not for fame, not for profit, but for the simple, stubborn belief that people deserved better. On Saturday morning, Mike pulled into Walter's driveway, as he often did. The old man was already waiting with 2 coffees and a knowing smile. "You hear about Frank?" Walter asked, handing Mike a cup. Mike nodded. "Yeah, he passed the partnership certification. Got approved for his first mobility client last week." Walter raised his eyebrows. "Now that's a full circle moment." Mike sipped his coffee. "He's trying." "That's all any of us can do," Walter said. "Try." They sat in silence, watching the birds hop through the yard, the sky warming with morning light. Finally, Walter spoke. "You know, some people chase legacy their whole lives, thinking it's something you build out of steel or cash or concrete. But sometimes, legacy is simpler. It's a repaired belt, a kind word, a man who shows up when it counts." Mike looked out over the town, the place he once thought would never change. And now it had, because of one moment, one choice, one scooter. He smiled. "Yeah," he said quietly, "and sometimes the smallest fix can steer everything in a new direction."